Radio Cairo International Service presentes Special Program COP27 Egypt 2022.
I thank Radio Cairo and its listeners. My name is Moreno. I was born in Egypt and came to Brazil when I was 11 years old. I am a psychologist by training with a DESS in Environment and Society. I am currently in an NGO called Women's Observatory, and I had a long feminist trajectory. First of all, I want to highlight the importance of the environment in Brazil, which is reflected throughout the planet, since we are in a tropical area with lots of vegetation and lots of biodiversity. And we know that human activities have caused global warming, just as we know that the time we have to act before the collapse is very short. And at this point, I would like to talk about climate change and how it has particularly affected women. These climatic changes have been felt more intensely by the most vulnerable populations, such as the riverside population or those who live on the hills, because they can cause landslides and floods. But not only. The climate has changed abruptly and unexpectedly. Women in Brazil represent 52% of the population, 60% of whom are black and brown. We are 50% heads of families, but most of us are unemployed. When we work, we are confined to the less important positions, even if we accumulate more years of education than men. On average, 4 more years of education, and we earn, on average, 30% less than men for the same kind of work. We, therefore, cannot meet the demand of the family we lead or whose budget we contribute to. We know that climate change has an impact on the management of land for plantation, with changes in crops and production, as well as on biodiversity that harms the production of fruits and vegetables, which guarantee food security and sovereignty. Brazil is back on the hunger map. And there is a lack of food. The prices are increasing due to climate change. In the family budget, food represents more than 60% of income, which has been reduced by unemployment, especially for women heads of households, precisely because they earn less than men. We know that women in the semi-arid region walk an average of 90 days a year to fetch water, and they go up the hill with the can of water on their heads, taking their child with them. We women have been tasked to take care of the health of children and the elderly, in addition to that of the partner and our own health, which is sensitive to sudden changes in climate. And there is no greater pain for women than to see their children crying from hunger, sick, and without protection against the cold, or without cooling ventilation and an airy house in the summer. The homeless population has increased a lot lately, and today you can see whole families sleeping on the streets begging for food. Climate change has also affected children's education activities, which are limited to lessons in times of pandemic at home and which have restricted their access to food aid offered in school by the government. It also affects leisure. While they are confined between four walls inside the house, whether in the intense cold or the unbearable heat. The impact also extends to riverside water management with the seasonality of fishing and mangroves, as well as tidal changes with fishermen in coastal ecosystems. These factors affect the quality of life of women and the population, in addition to many others, which over time appear to the extent that each group and community depends on the biological balance of its territories, with its culture, its tradition, food habits, and customs of life. As is the case of Minas Gerais, of the rupture of the waste rock dam of Brumadinho, property of the mining company Vale, which polluted the Paraopeba river with heavy metals, which caused the decline of vegetable gardens and orchards in charge of women, which they often survive in addition to various diseases. The Amazon and the Atlantic forest have been burned, with repercussion for the climate, and indigenous peoples have been silenced. At this event, the world thanks the people of Egypt, especially the city of peace Sharm el-Sheikh, for their generosity in welcoming people from all over the world to discuss such a sensitive issue. To the participants of COP27, we send a feminist and pacifist message. There is a connection between the fight against mining extractivism and the large-scale export agricultural model, which are the real cause of the impacts of climate change on women's lives and bodies. In this sense, we work on a collective position to understand that it is important for women to build and demand climate justice, because the voice of women in their territories of resistance represents help in the face of the emergency climate we live in. Women must assume their status as guardians of forests, rivers, biodiversity, and our environment, because women are the most affected in raising awareness and educating their children for the preservation and conservation of the environment because of their own biological condition as a manager's life. I thank the listeners, the staff of Radio Cairo, and especially Mohamed El-Kamel and Amira El-Khalili for the opportunity of this integration between peoples and nations. Thank God. Alhamdulillah. Rachel Moreno.
To the listeners of Radio Cairo, I am Jim Brown, an activist from Scotland, and I present the speech of Heitor Scalabrini Costa on the importance of the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, which will take place in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, November the 6th to the 18th, 2022. Here is the speech. My name is Heitor Scalambrini Costa, retired professor of Federal University of Pernambuco. My undergraduate studies were carried out at the Physics Department of the State University of Campinas, São Paulo. My Masters at the Department of Nuclear Energy in the Federal University of Pernambuco. My undergraduate studies were carried out at the Physics Department of the State University of Campinas in São Paulo. My Masters at the Department of Nuclear Energy at the Federal University of Pernambuco. I have a doctorate at the Kadash Study Centre linked to the French Atomic Energy Commission. Both the Masters and the doctoral degrees have an emphasis on solar energy. For many years I worked with the diffusion of photovoltaic technology on a small scale in the northeast region of Brazil, where we have the Caatinga biome, the fourth largest biome in Brazil, corresponding to 11% of the national territory, but has lost 59% of its original covering. According to studies by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it is one of the most vulnerable biomes to climate change, the drastic consequences of which are already being noticed throughout the semi-arid regions. It is worth noting the similarities in climate and vegetation between Brazilian northeast and Egypt. Both suffer from lack of rain, and predominantly desert vegetation in Egypt has similarities in Brazil, that having one of the largest areas of the world susceptible to desertification, with an expanse of 1.3 million square kilometres, which houses a population of 31 million people. Today, the desertified areas of Brazil already cover an area the size of England. Deforestation, climate change, soil degradation are synergistic effects that point to the path of destruction and worsening tragic effects of global warming. Having made these presentations, in this testimony I express my disillusionment and disbelief with regard to global governance in the face of climate change, within the framework of the 27th United Nations Conference of the Parties of Climate Change, COP27, which will take place in Egypt next November. Another event aimed at discussing goals and actions to address climate change, bringing together governmental and non-governmental representatives from different countries around the world. The major producers and refiners of oil, gas and coal will also be present at COP27, defending their interests as they have always done at all climate conferences, and seeking to make it difficult and prevent the necessary agreements to be reached to reduce the impact of the use of fossil fuels in the global energy matrix. What can be seen is that the almost 30 years of climate conferences, the policies adopted were insufficient to reverse the emissions of greenhouse gases on the Earth's atmosphere, nor to find effective and strategic solutions to the current solution of global warming, which puts in risk the entire planet. The results presented by the Keeling Curve, carried out at Mauna Observatory on the island of Hawaii, consists of a graph that shows the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over time, based on continuous measurements from 1958 to the present day. This is the reference database for any discussion on the greenhouse effect and global warming. What has been verified over time is the linear increase in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. In the year 2021, the concentration was already around 420 parts per million, while in the 60s of the last century it was 317 parts per million. Even with the agreements and promises made within the scope of the market of reduction of gas emissions, year after year, records of the average global temperature on the planet were observed. Every year the earth gets hotter. This situation is related to the increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, mainly due to the use of fossil fuels. Since the Rio 92 conference, however, the actions of climate skeptics, lobbyists for the oil, gas and coal companies, managed to stop the advances and the necessary speed to avoid the worsening of this alarming situation that we find ourselves in today. There is a great similarity in this action of those who are against life with what happened with the powerful lobby of the tobacco industry within the scope of the World Health Organization, slowing down and creating obstacles to measures that could have saved thousands of lives. Thus, the debate on climate change increasingly sidelines greedy companies in the defence of their economic interests, who fight against the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, opposing social movements fighting for life, for fair, ethical, plural planet that protects natural ecosystems. The fight is unequal. However, the collective consciousness transformed into an active practice can tip the scales for public and natural interests involved in this question, which is that of our civilization. The energy transition necessary to contain greenhouse gas emissions does not only mean an increase in the energy matrix of renewable energy sources, a mere change of energy sources, but it makes it possible and gives a chance to an urgent debate about the meaning of living in a capitalist, consumerist, predatory and militaristic society. Thus, the engagement in the struggle, which is not just for environmentalists, but for all men and women of goodwill, is fundamental for the survival of all humanity that is threatened and requires the realisation of deep changes in the current civilization model, which implies the changing and unsuitable model of production and consumption and people's own way of life. The increasing involvement and mobilisation of organised civil society is essential and even fundamental to answer the question, which world do we want? What kind of society do you want? And here I emphasise the role of women as an active participant in the choices we must make. It is a joint commitment, due to its own biological imperative, to generate and take good care of life. These are the true fundamental conditions for preserving and conserving the environment. In a brief message to the participants of the 27th COP, I would say, therein the proposals to define who will pay the bill, stipulate global goals, and for each country to fill the commitments they assume. May the bigger polluters have the greater responsibilities, and that the participation of those who defend fossil fuels, oil, gas and coal is no longer allowed within the scope of the climate change conferences. This participation is a contradiction. Throughout this process, it is worth emphasising the vital role of civil society in denouncing the lack of effectiveness in combating the greenhouse gas emissions, demanding another posture from governments in the direction of limiting the use of fossil fuels and replacing them with sources of renewable energy without ceasing to discuss their socio-environmental impacts, increasing the energy efficiency of the processes. Sustainable models for extracting minerals and raising cattle should also be part of the agenda, as both activities greatly contribute to the deterioration of climatic conditions. So I end my statement by saluting and at the same time thanking once again the listeners, the staff of Radio Cairo, and especially Mohammed El-Kamel and Amira El-Khalili for the opportunity for this integration between people and nation. Inshallah.